I'm Tara McGivern. This is my screencast for CA1, Distributed Games Programming. I worked on this game with Michael Donohoe, and I'm going to give you a quick demo of the game. It is 2D platformer in which you must reach the end and defeat the enemies along the way. It is also 2-player, so let's give that a go. So there's an enemy coming straight at us, so you can destroy him. A thing to note is that there are 2 players, so you can both players can play using the same keyboard, and player 1 can also use the gamepad. So they can move using the left analog stick. They can press A to jump, they can press B to fire, and if you see the enemy up here, you can use X to fire the missile. So I'm going to just advance through the rest of the level. So you'll take note in how the screen scrolls with the player. And there's also a physics implement so we can jump. I'm gonna get this guy. And then there's also collision, so we better get our other little friend here. And now we're just gonna reach the end of our level. And that's it. So I'm going to talk through the code that I developed in this game. So we just hit exit, and we're going to start off in world. So the first thing I did was set the world so that it was no longer scrolling vertically and instead horizontally. And to do this, I changed the X and Y attributes in the world bound, so I made it longer horizontally and shorter vertically. The next piece of code I developed was for the screen to scroll. So if you notice, the screen would scroll with the player, and it also scrolls depending on which half they're in. So originally it would divide the screen into 2, and if you were in the right half, the screen would scroll in the direction to the right, and if you were in the left half, the screen would scroll in the left. Now originally you would spawn in the middle of the screen, so it would automatically start scrolling left, and to deal with this, rather than dividing by 2, I would divide by just over 2, so 2.001. So this way it's almost like in the right 50.5%, and then on the left it was like 49.999%. Now the next part of the game I was involved with was implementing 2-player functionality, and for a while I very much struggled with this task. So the first thing I did was I added a second player very similar to our first player. And when I added them, 2 players appeared on the screen, but they both responded when I would press player 1's keys. So I actually created 2 different, an extra type for the aircraft, which is what our player is an instance of. So I created in the header class player 2, and whenever a new player was created and our game started, I would call 2 methods called set key bindings, and our set key bindings would go into the player class, and towards the bottom it would check the type of each player. So if it was player 1, it would set the keys corresponding to up, down, left, right, space and M, and if it was player 2, it was WASD. Now this still didn't change anything because both players were still responding, and to solve this problem I had to add a new category. So originally our category class ended at enemy projectile, and then I added player 2 aircraft, and I would shift that by 7 bits, and in our world I would after we've told our game that our second player is type 2, in the player class when I set the keys, I would then set the category of these keys to player to aircraft. So it would know not to move player 2 up when I pressed up and only do it when I press W. So next functionality I added to the game was the gamepad. So in game state we listen for a gamepad if joystick 0 is connected, and we set a static joystick start point. So this start point basically says that when you start the game and your left analog stick is just sitting there, remember the coordinate for that left analog stick. That's its idle point. So don't move the player when it's equal to that. And in our handle joystick input code, whenever the axis of the joystick is different and not equal to static joystick start, move the player depending on direction, so move right, move left, and move down. And our other controls are handled by checking if the first button is pressed, or button 0, which is A on the gamepad, and that will move our player up, and so on and so forth. Now, I also added physics and collision to the game. So physics I handled in the aircraft class. So whenever we whenever we have a new movement, it will accelerate the player dependent on that, but this changes especially when we want to jump. So I had to write the code to handle that, and that's actually handled in the player class. So generally it would just accelerate the aircraft by the velocity and the aircraft's max speed. But to handle physics and tell the aircraft it was in the air, we had to check the velocity of y. So when you increase your velocity and you want to move upwards, you're less than 0. So in this case, when I set the key bindings, or set the actions, binded the actions to movement. So if I move up, I would move greater because I'm going to jump. So rather than just moving 1, I set it to -8, and in the code at the top of the screen, I would check if it was less than 0, and I also created a boolean that says is in air. And if our aircraft is not in air and our velocity, our y velocity, is less than 0, we'll set it to true, and we will also set the position of our aircraft to jump up on the y-axis, well, by less than 200. So this moves it in the air and creates the jump effect. And the same for here. This code deals with if the player they've pressed jump already, so they're in the air, they're less than, their velocity is less than 0, but it checks if they're already in the air, and if they're already in the air, we'll set our velocity and y to 0. So this means that the player can't hold up and stay in the air for as long as they like. It is set to just 1 jump. So to collision, I did this in the handle collision method. If we just go to it, okay. So some of the adjustments I made was accommodating for the second aircraft. So I would use an OR and then check match categories and apply the corresponding actions to if an enemy hits a player. So at the bottom, I tried to match if the player had hit an object that was of the level category. So the level category is something Michael created, and it is what makes it possible for pieces of our level, our platforms, to appear in the game. So I check if these come into contact, and if our player is in the air and they correspond to the first player. We will then set their in the air to false, because now we know that they've contacted our players hit the platform, and then we will set their Y velocity to 0 so they cannot fall through the platform. And I do this code then for our aircraft, our player 2 aircraft. The next part of the code I was involved with was the textures. So I found the textures online at OpenGameArt, and then I applied the necessary modifications to have them in the game. So it was part of a huge file full of multiple characters and sprite sheet animations, and I just took one character off and would change the colors, create a player 2. Other parts of the code I was involved with was creating I arranged some of the platforms or the level tiles, and that was actually quite challenging, trying to figure out exactly where they were placed properly. But it was a lot of trial and error, and I believe that is it for the code. Next thing is networking functionality. So how could we create some online functionality for this game, and how would it change the gameplay? So at the minute we have 2 players. So we could have 2 players playing on the same keyboard, and then we could also have 2 more players on another keyboard on another computer, and this would be similar to the game Castle Crashers, and it would be their goal in what would probably be a much bigger level with much more enemies to get through this together as a team. And another possibility for the game for online would be we keep the idea that our 2 players are together in the same team, and then we create 2 other players on the other side of the map, and they are on the opposing team, and they have to defeat our 2 players, or it is kind of more of a race who can get to the other side of the map first and win. So it'd be a bit like a race. So we'll have players on the right screen and players on the left, and they have to get past each other to get their goals. So I believe that is it. Thank you for watching.